Have you ever been out in public with your toddler mid-meltdown and noticed another little one sitting quietly, fully absorbed? Because in Japan, it's genuinely not unusual for a 5-year-old to stay immersed in a single activity for 14 minutes without constant reminders. Meanwhile, many families elsewhere feel relieved if their little one can stay engaged for even 5 uninterrupted minutes. So what's happening in those first 5 years that shapes attention span so dramatically? The answer isn't stricter discipline, and it isn't cultural magic. It's early brain development shaped by everyday habits. What Japanese parents do in the earliest years aligns remarkably closely with what modern neuroscience now understands about focus and self-regulation. They prioritize emotional security before control, rhythm before pressure, and consistency before correction. And that sequence matters because the nervous system develops before logic ever does. In the first 5 years, the brain is wiring at an extraordinary speed, forming millions of connections that determine how easily a child can regulate attention and emotion. If those early environments are overstimulating, inconsistent, or stressful, the developing brain adapts to chaos rather than calm. But when early environments are predictable, secure, and emotionally regulated, the brain wires for sustained focus instead of constant alertness. So if we want calmer, more focused pediatric patients, we have to understand what shapes that wiring from the very beginning. The foundation of the Japanese approach often gets misunderstood in the West, which is deep, consistent emotional security before any focus on behavior. When a young pediatric patient feels reliably safe and emotionally connected, their stress response system stays quieter at baseline. And that matters because chronic activation of the stress system directly interferes with development of the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control and attention. A securely attached child doesn't need to escalate constantly for reassurance, because the nervous system already trusts that support is available. When Japanese parents respond quickly and calmly to early distress, they're not reinforcing dependency, they're teaching regulation through co-regulation. A child's nervous system literally mirrors the adult's, so a calm response lowers heart rate, lowers cortisol, and stabilizes emotional circuitry. Over time, those repeated calm interactions become internalized, and self-regulation begins to emerge from within rather than being forced from outside. This is why emotional security often looks like independence later, because the brain isn't scanning for threat, it's free to focus. When discipline eventually comes, it rests on trust rather than fear, and that dramatically changes how boundaries are received. A child who trusts their caregiver's calm authority is far less likely to enter a prolonged power struggle. So before we talk about focus or intelligence or attention span, we have to recognize that regulation always develops before reasoning. The next principle is one that Japanese families treat almost as non-negotiable, and that's protecting sleep with remarkable consistency. Most toddlers in Japan receive between 11 and 12 hours of sleep each night, not occasionally, but routinely. During deep sleep, the brain consolidates learning from the day, strengthening useful neural pathways while trimming excess connections. Executive function networks, including attention and working memory, are stabilized during these uninterrupted sleep cycles. A well-rested pediatric patient wakes with a nervous system that is already regulated rather than one that's compensating for fatigue. Even one shortened night of sleep can increase emotional reactivity and reduce impulse control the following day. Consistency matters because the developing brain thrives on rhythm, and circadian predictability reduces background stress. When bedtime varies widely, the nervous system stays slightly unsettled, which directly affects concentration. Japanese families often protect sleep over social convenience, understanding that cognitive performance tomorrow depends on regulation tonight. And when sleep is protected consistently, sustained attention becomes easier, not because the child is forced, but because the brain is supported. One of the most consistent habits in Japanese early childhood is daily time outdoors, not occasionally, but as a normal part of every single day. This outdoor exposure is not treated as a reward or a special outing. It's considered foundational to healthy development. Time in natural environments has been shown to lower baseline cortisol levels, which allows the prefrontal cortex to mature without chronic stress interference. Activities like balancing, climbing, and uneven terrain walking stimulate the vestibular system, which directly supports attention and spatial processing. The vestibular system communicates with attention networks in the brain, helping a child learn how to stabilize focus physically and mentally. Unstructured outdoor play also strengthens proprioceptive input, which improves body awareness and reduces internal restlessness. When a child's body is fully engaged through natural movement, the nervous system settles rather than seeks artificial stimulation. Importantly, this exposure continues regardless of mild weather changes, reinforcing adaptability and resilience. Natural environments also provide slower visual input compared to digital screens, allowing attention systems to strengthen without constant rapid switching. When sensory input is rhythmic and organic rather than abrupt and artificial, neural networks stabilize more effectively. So daily nature exposure is not simply about fresh air, it's about regulating the nervous system in ways that build focus from the ground up. The next principle can feel uncomfortable for modern families, and that is the strict limitation of screen exposure in early childhood. In many Japanese households, children under 3 are exposed to little or no independent screen time at all. Early screen overexposure has been associated with measurable changes in white matter development in areas related to language and executive function. Fast-paced digital input trains the brain to expect constant novelty, which makes slower real-world tasks feel understimulating. When screens are limited, children are more likely to tolerate boredom, and boredom is where sustained attention actually develops. The developing brain wires according to repeated experience, so repeated rapid stimulation can weaken deep focus networks. Removing screens from routine spaces such as mealtimes also increases conversational interaction, which further strengthens cognitive development. Children are exquisitely sensitive to divided attention, and frequent parental device use subtly disrupts emotional synchrony. And when this synchrony between adult and child is disrupted repeatedly, regulation patterns become less stable. So, limiting screens isn't about moral judgment, it's about protecting the developing brain's capacity for deep, sustained focus. After limiting artificial stimulation, Japanese parents intentionally replace it with rich, hands-on sensory experiences that activate multiple brain regions at once. When a child plays with materials like dough, clay, sand, or water, sensory cortex, motor cortex, and planning networks all fire simultaneously. That simultaneous activation strengthens what neuroscientists call integrated neural circuitry, which improves cognitive flexibility and problem solving. Activities that require coordination and adjustment teach the brain to slow down, assess feedback, and refine movement. When something falls apart, the brain is given an opportunity to evaluate error and try again without external pressure. This process strengthens executive function networks responsible for persistence and frustration tolerance. Japanese early environments often include gardening, cooking, folding cloth, and small household participation, all of which provide meaningful sensory input. These tasks are not treated as busy work, they are treated as contribution, which strengthens both motor coordination and internal motivation. When sensory input, movement, and purpose combine, the brain builds stronger, long-range connections rather than fragmented, short bursts of stimulation. So instead of fast, external entertainment, Japanese parenting favors slow, tactile, embodied learning that strengthens attention from within. Another cornerstone of this approach is sustained face-to-face interaction, which is one of the most powerful drivers of early brain development. Real conversation requires attention, processing, response, and emotional reading, all of which activate complex neural networks. When a child engages in back-and-forth dialogue, language networks and executive function systems strengthen together. Describing everyday actions, asking open questions, and pausing for response builds processing speed and working memory. Japanese families often maintain device-free shared meals, creating consistent opportunities for language exposure and emotional attunement. When a caregiver listens fully, without divided attention, the child's nervous system feels validated and stable. That synchrony supports regulation circuits in the brain, making it easier for the child to manage frustration and maintain focus. Even subtle interruptions in adult attention can disrupt this synchrony, which is why mindful presence matters more than proximity alone. Consistent conversational engagement strengthens vocabulary, reasoning, empathy, and eventually academic performance. So when language is built through real interaction rather than passive exposure, attention becomes sustained rather than scattered. One of the most defining features of the Japanese approach is that cooperation is built through internal understanding rather than external enforcement. Instead of repeated commands or raised voices, expectations are explained in ways that connect behavior to its wider impact. When children understand how their actions affect others, empathy networks in the brain become more active. A parent might say, "We use soft voices here so everyone can concentrate," rather than simply insisting on silence. This framing shifts the child's focus from avoiding punishment to contributing positively. Internal motivation activates prefrontal decision-making systems, which are more sustainable than compliance driven by fear. By guiding behavior through reasoning and modeling, children gradually internalize standards without constant monitoring. Correction often happens privately and respectfully, preserving dignity rather than triggering defensiveness. Repeated experiences of calm explanation strengthen neural pathways associated with moral reasoning and impulse control. So over time, behavior becomes self-guided rather than externally managed, which is what allows sustained focus and calm cooperation. Structure is another quiet strength of Japanese parenting, and it shows up most clearly in consistent daily routines. When daily sequences are predictable, the developing brain conserves energy that would otherwise be spent negotiating basic expectations. Predictability reduces background anxiety, and lower anxiety improves access to executive function networks. Children who know what comes next feel safer, and safety is what allows attention to stabilize. When routines are rehearsed daily, behavior becomes automatic rather than effortful. And repeated structured sequences strengthen neural organization, which supports working memory and task completion. And therefore, transitions are smoother when they are anticipated rather than abrupt. Any parent knows giving a 2-minute warning on leaving the park is a must with any toddler. And when the nervous system expects rhythm, emotional storms become less frequent and less intense. So structure does not restrict freedom, it creates the internal stability that allows freedom to exist. One of the most misunderstood differences is that the first 5 years in Japan are not treated as a race toward academic performance. There is far less emphasis on early drilling, flashcards, or accelerated formal instruction during these early years. Because neurological development follows a sequence, and regulation networks must mature before higher reasoning networks can operate efficiently. When academic pressure is introduced before the brain is ready, stress systems activate, which can interfere with working memory and sustained attention. Japanese early childhood prioritizes movement, social harmony, and emotional safety long before structured academics. And when those foundations are stable, academic skills later tend to emerge more smoothly and with less resistance. A child who can regulate emotion and sustain attention for longer periods is far more prepared for formal learning when it becomes appropriate. So the goal in early childhood is not acceleration, it is alignment with biological readiness. Now, you might be listening to all of this and thinking it sounds ideal, but how does it work in a modern household with real pressures? The answer is not perfection, it's consistency in small, manageable shifts. The first point of change is always sleep. This is because sleep amplifies every other intervention. Add consistent daily outdoor exposure, even if it's simply a predictable walk in the same park each afternoon. Gradually reduce screen exposure rather than eliminating it overnight, and replace it with hands-on alternatives rather than empty space. Protect face-to-face interaction by removing divided attention during key moments such as meals and transitions. Introduce clear daily rhythms so that your child's nervous system can begin to anticipate what comes next. And lastly, invite meaningful contribution into daily life because contribution builds competence and internal motivation. These small adjustments compound over time because the developing brain adapts to repeated patterns more than isolated moments. So when we ask why some children appear calmer and more focused, the answer is rarely a single secret technique. It is the cumulative effect of a variety of changes, including emotional security to protected sleep and predictable structure. Also, attention is not forced into existence. It grows when the nervous system feels safe and organized. And intelligence in early childhood is less about early academics and more about the brain's ability to regulate, integrate, and persist. You don't need extreme methods, and you don't need to change everything overnight. What you need is alignment with how the developing brain actually works, and the patience to let consistency shape long-term outcomes. When foundations are built in the early years, focus becomes natural, cooperation becomes internal, and learning becomes far less of a struggle.